this is Pat Lynch, and you are watching and listening the Career Pathways podcast, brought to you live. Actually, we're not live, brought to you recorded, but in the KILT studio, deep in the heart of Mabee Simpson Library on the campus of Lyon College. With me, behind the board, as always, making the magic happen, is...
Producer Cheyenne.
All right, and I can't do anything without it. We have a special guest that isn't mic'd up way in the background. It's Johnny. Say, yay! there you are. She's auditing the class. So, but we're very glad to have her, and we're very glad to have Dr. Wu Q. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Wu Chu.
Chu.
Yep. Sounds more like CHU.
Chu? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
yes, Cheyenne told me. Okay, so yes, she also could point out Nepal on the map, and I was hopeless in terms of finding it. But Wu, welcome.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Yes, Career Pathways. The primary purpose of the podcast was that we wanted to interview all of the Lyon faculty that find out their story. Have us learn about them, and then, one thing we'll also talk about is just careers. Also, you have a career obviously as a history major, and any advice you would share, with students. But first thing we always start with is just tell us about yourself, kind of where you're from, and kind of your journey on how you arrived here at Lyon College.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Wu Chu, and thank you so much for inviting me for this podcast. So a bit story about myself. I was born and raised up in the central part of China. It's a Henan province, which is one of the heartland, and it's one of the big agricultural provinces. Right. If you ever get an opportunity, you fly over it, you'll find that's just another flying over country, like in China.
Kind of like the middle of our country?
Yes.
All right.
So I grew up in there, and I'm always interested in like a study of history ever since in the 7th grade. So in China, the first 6th grade, we only learn like 3 major subjects, which are Chinese, English, and math. 7th grade, we're going to learn 9 different subjects. Yeah. And my favorite is always history. Afterwards, when I was in high school, our family kind of relocated because for my family's job relocation, we moved to Beijing, which is a big city in China. And there I completed my high schools, and there's an opportunity because that time is 2008. You have the Olympics, and also so many foreigners actually visiting China. Then there's an opportunity for me to select, okay, where should I continue my college degrees? Right. Then there's an opportunity kind of shows itself, okay, I can stay in China and stay in there for the college. Or my parents tell me, okay, there's another opportunity. You can actually try. Why don't you try yourself to study abroad? And then apply for different colleges, pass some language tests, and then I started my undergrad in the heartland of the United States, actually in Iowa. So there, I actually started out not as a history major, because as earlier you mentioned, like a study of history is always being viewed as a very Eurocentric discipline. And at that time, I'm a little bit scared, because I come from China. The kind of education I received put a heavy emphasis over East Asian history. Right. European history or like America history, I'm in the total blind spot. So I kind of feel like, okay, maybe I would just, even though history is my favorite subject, I would just stay away from it. And I started college with accounting major. Yeah.
All right.
Numbers.
Well, you can get a good job and the practical.
Yeah.
Was that family pressure or just your concern about just the study of how history is studied in America?
It's actually a little bit about both. of course, when I enrolled in undergrad, I always have to think about a future job prospect. I kind of feel like at the time, business school is a very popular destination. A lot of my friends, they actually go to major in business schools. And also my dad is running a small business back in China. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe after completing my degrees, just like many other kids, just go back home and take over the family business. And it would be very pragmatic if I learn something skills like, accounting.
Right.
But then it's like after spending 2 years in the business school, I kind of realized it's very different than what I anticipated. It's all about like memorizations of tax laws. And the tax system is actually different, way different. So I kind of figure out, okay, it's not going anywhere. If I go back and then take over the business, I probably have to study the new tax laws all over again. And then it was like in the second semester of my second year at Iowa, there's some general education requirements require us to take some humanity classes. It was that semester I kind of realized, well, actually, you know what? In University of Iowa, we actually have a pretty good East Asian history study program. I took a class. That semester, I actually took 2 classes. One is the Introduction to the Hebrew Bible, and the other one is the modern Japanese history. And then I kind of, all of a sudden I figured out, okay, the tax laws are really boring. I'm still very interested into the study of, the humanities. The Japanese history class, since I have some background, I really figured out, okay, I really like it. And for the introduction to the Hebrew Bible, even though I'm very unfamiliar with that part of the world, but still I find, the years, the stories, the basic everything. I just find I have the passions into it. And then I switched my majors. And afterwards, I kind of switched major in history, and then I go on Iowa, complete my BA and MA in history, and then applied for a grad school, and I got accepted into University of Virginia. And then afterwards, I kind of graduated, and then come here.
Well, so at Virginia, what was your dissertation on?
Oh, okay. My dissertation actually focuses on the Korean War.
Okay.
It's a kind of a long story, but it's about the Korean War POW issue. So I grew up in the central part of China. Another major thing about my hometown is that there's actually a lot of people they serve in the military, and there are a lot of Korean veterans that kind of living in my hometown. And sometimes when we're doing some volunteer works in the high schools and middle schools, we go to those VA homes where we can talk to these veterans. And Korean War is really a familiar topic. But in this country, it's known as the Forgotten War. And then eventually, I started out actually, I wish to learn something about, it's a Korean Civil War, but eventually escalated into a total armed conflict between China and the United States. More interested into the diplomatic aspect of it. But then very quickly, I discovered that there's some other issues. The Korean War broke out between 1950 and 1953. The battlefield fighting pretty much stopped at 51. The rest of 2 years are just the negotiations over how to exchange the prisoners of wars, the POWs. And then it became interested into the exchange, the diplomatic negotiations over there. And then I walk into the archives and I discover something interesting because I read some documents, the government documents on both Chinese and American sides. Looks like because it's the beginning of the Cold War, both sides are trying to spread the correct ideology. So I read some Washington documents written by President Truman, basically saying, "Oh, these Chinese soldiers are fighting on the Korean War battlefield. That these are the simple Chinese village folks who's been cheated by a small number of communist radicals in Moscow. Then it is our job to teach them the correct values of democracy." And then on the Chinese side, I read something similar. It's like when China are sending their troops, and there are some high-level government meetings where Mao Zedong basically saying, well, you know what? These American folks who be sending to fight the wars on the Korean Peninsula, these are just, kind-hearted American peace-loving people who's been cheated by a small number of financial capitalists on Wall Street.
Right.
Therefore, it is our job to teach them the correct ideology of communism so that they can be no longer be cheated. It's our job to teach them the correct ideology of communism. Then I go to the archives. I begin to read some of the documents concerning the POW's experiences. Then I just find something totally different.
Yeah.
My original anticipation is that there will be a conflict between, communism, democracy. It's an ideological conflict.
Right.
But on the Chinese side, I discovered, okay, these Americans are not like the China's international proletarian brothers.
Right.
What they are doing, like the Chinese are beginning to teach them communism through lectures, public speeches. These American soldiers, they organize themselves into the organization called the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK, to fight back the Chinese indoctrination. While at the same time, the American army, they hired a group of missionaries who used to work and live in China for a couple of decades, and then send them to the POW camps to preach American democracy and Christian values. And then the Chinese POWs, they never organized a communist group.
Right.
What they did is actually they organized themselves into another like a Paoge organization, which is nearly like the counterparts of KKK in China. They're still famous for causing China's drug problems nowadays.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. And I read some desperate letters written by the American missionaries complaining they think they're going to do the missionary works, but they actually run into mobs of Chinese mafia organizations.
Yeah. Because I'm familiar with organized crime in Japan. That's kind of they've made
the
movies,
Yakuzas,
yes, and they've all that. I wasn't familiar that there's organized crime in China. There's probably organized crime everywhere, but how does the government address something like that? I think they'd handle it very differently than democracies.
Surprisingly, I would say when the war ended,
yes,
it's actually somewhat similar because it's a Cold War after the KKKs and also the Chinese, the Paoge. They are the ones they're having this struggles with their captors. After they return home, both governments they began to screen out these potential traitors.
Right.
For the Chinese, the Chinese government basically said, okay, even though you're Chinese soldiers, but you've been captured by the Americans, you've been brainwashed for 3 years. Therefore, we need to make sure there are no so-called American imperialist agent. So they conducted very thorough investigations for these returned POWs, and while the result doesn't really sound very good, many of them being persecuted because the Chinese government viewed them as traitors. Yeah. Similar stories on the American side. So Pentagon put every returned American POWs through a screening process. Yeah. And they're trying the basic argument is that these Americans, their minds has been tainted by communism for so long. Therefore, they need to make sure there are no communist infiltrators. And there's years of investigation goes on, and many people are actually being court-martialed and put on trial. And the FBI classified a number of these American POWs as a lifelong threat to the U.S. national security. It's under a directive of Hoover. Yeah. So this FBI surveillance over these returned American POW didn't end until the 1980s, where most of them actually began to die away.
Yeah, because it was them returning entered into the McCarthy era of here in the in that total panic over communism entering the American government and everywhere else. So yeah, that's interesting. In your research on your dissertation, was it challenging to find a lot of information? Because I would think some of this would be protected, like the redacted and things that were the government would deem confidential, and they have a pretty loose definition of what is confidential, and sometimes I think they want to just hide things that might be embarrassing. So I don't know if that became a challenge for you in your research.
There are challenges on both sides. Generally speaking, because many of these former POWs on both Chinese and American side, they did not pass away. Actually, they're still alive. So the thing is, in the U.S., there's a general principle: if somebody is still alive, you're not supposed to get access to their, personal official service record. But there are some people actually they passed away, and they're like in the 50s when Pentagon are launching this very comprehensive investigation. A lot of paperwork are left, and also FBI report is in there. Most of them are actually declassified. And I actually found out another thing is it's kind of amusing is that when these American POWs returned, Pentagon actually give medals to these KKK members because they are the patriotic Americans who can resist the communist brainwashing. So that's kind of thing I find kind of interesting. Whereas on the Chinese side, it's a little bit tricky because it has something to do with the PAOGE organization. This organization, the Underground Mafia organization, they have closer ties with the Chinese Communist Party's power rivalry, the Nationalist Party. So before these POW being returned, Beijing actually gave some policy directives, like dividing the POW into 3 categories. Those are like the brave fighters who resisted the Americans' indoctrination. Those are neutral POWs who just acquiescent. And there are third, like the party traitors and those stuff. But then it's like all of a sudden, when the investigation started, they actually discovered those who return home. They are not faithful communists. Those are just the mafia group members who return because of some traditional Chinese values like loyalty, family members, filial piety to the parents. And then they discover these are actually PAOGE members. And the Beijing have to revise a lot of the policies saying, okay, now we need to add a 4th category. The PAOGE members.
Criminals. Leaving Virginia and then eventually arriving here at Lyon, what classes are you teaching here at Lyon College?
So I'm currently teaching the World Civilization 2, but last semester I teach World Civilization 1. And also I'm teaching some courses related to East Asia. So this semester I'm teaching modern the Chinese Revolution, which is the modern Chinese history. And last semester I teach Introduction to Modern East Asia, which is a condensed version of modern history of China, Japan, and Korea from the mid-19th century to now.
Oh, I was going to say, if you're trying to do it from the very early, the early days, there could be that could conceivably be like Western Civ 1, 2. You could do like a 1 and 2 for East Asian studies.
Yeah, my plan is actually to use the modern East Asian class as a recruiting mechanism where students sign up and then they learn something about China, Japan, and Korea. Then they become interested. Then they will sign up for my more concentrated studies. So I say the modern China, modern Japan, modern Korean history.
With students that are in your East Asian class, is it surprising and all new to them? Because I'm just trying to think of American education. I don't think they would have much exposure to any of that material.
I would say most of my students who actually enrolled in the modern East Asian class, they don't really have much of a prior exposure to East Asian history. So this is definitely one of the challenge. But they're actually good to give me some inspirations to teach history as I'm trying to teach students some commonalities to let them see things that are common that happens both in China, it happens in Europe, it also happens in this country. For example, my dissertation research is like I started out thinking of, okay, all the Chinese people, they believe in this, the American people believe in this. But hey, take a look at the government. How do they treat the POWs? It looks like it's similar. They all have suspicions, and they have the questions about these soldiers' loyalties. Therefore, what I'm teaching in my East Asian history class, I always ask a student, hey, look, even though the content of history, the history process in East Asia, they're different. But look, these are the same actions probably you're gonna get from any politician, let's say in U.S. in Europe. Whenever there's a foreign enemy show up, what's your first reaction? I mean, the politician they're gonna be tough. They say, "I'm the only one who can defend this country for you."
Your class, how do you approach teaching it? Is it from kind of an American perspective or from an Asian perspective, or is there really just, or is there just one perspective? Because I always hear about history as being, as far as what lens or who's speaking it, because there's I don't know, bias or just interpretation, and so it's so it's not that it's not like mathematics or accounting, that okay, a debit and a credit, but it's subject to just more nuance and interpretation. And so how do you approach it?
Well, I actually approach it with several different perspectives. I try to balance it out a little bit. For example, I'm teaching the Chinese part of the modern East Asian. I try to show students multiple perspectives. For example, late 19th century, when the British and China, they were the biggest trading partners of the world at the time. So I'll show students like a different documents. For example, there's one in the 19th century when the British complained that the Chinese customs systems are too slow, they're corrupted. So they sent out diplomatic missions to ask the Chinese emperor to reform your trading system so that we can have earn more profit. And there's like extensive documents written down by these British diplomats. And on the other hand, you do have some Chinese people, they're writing the same documents complaining about the presence of the British. Like the Chinese, they care about, all they care about is the political stability, so they do not really have much of a need of the British product because there's nothing the Chinese really wanted from them. So their complaining is about that. When I teach the Chinese part of when I teach modern East Asian, I'm trying to show both perspective. But in addition to that, I'm also trying to bring some non-anthro factors that kind of have an impact over the trajectory of history. For example, later on, you have the Opium War broke out between China and Great Britain because China kind of outlawed opium, saying, okay, it's a contraband, you can no longer do it. But then the Britons are basically saying, insisting on we need to earn a profit, and then that war broke out. And then the non-anthro factor I'm introducing actually a natural phenomenon called El Nino. It's during the mid-19th century when the Opium War was happening. There's a El Nino happening that kind of seriously crippled China's agriculture output, making China's food security at risk, which really lowered China's capabilities to actually fight against the British. So that's another perspective that kind of explains how could the British, they're traveling halfway around the globe with a couple thousand peoples, they defeated this almighty Qing Empire at the time.
Yeah, because there was widespread starvation.
Yes.
For many Americans, they have just a very, very surface level view of the Cultural Revolution, and and what and so you're teaching that. How do you approach that as far as like from the beginning in terms of what as far as what Mao was trying to accomplish, and kind of because that really does it takes us all the way to what I consider modern China, right? So how do you approach the class and how do you teach it?
Okay, the Cultural Revolution is definitely one important theme in modern China history this semester I'm teaching. So that class I titled it as Revolution.
Yes,
because revolution itself is a radical, like a violent movement. It's a very radical changes happening in a short time period of time. So in that class, I basically tell students, okay, we cannot treat Cultural Revolution as independent historical event. We need to see take a look at the history from a broader perspective. So the basic narrative I'm telling the students is basically after China's been defeated during the first Opium War, many Chinese people, they begin to realize, okay, China is no longer the number one. And many Chinese intellectuals, peasants, or warlord, they begin to seek answers for one question. That question is, how to make China great again.
Right.
So the very first...
They didn't have a red baseball hat, did they? Oh, just asking.
Yeah, what they're trying to do is actually they're trying out different programs to save China. They tried out a restoration program, which in terms of national crisis, when the foreigners are defeating Chinese, many conservatives are saying, okay, all problem with China is actually this, China has deviated away from the traditional Confucian values. As long as we go back to the old days, it solves all China's problem. Which is the first solution put forward, it didn't work.
Yeah.
And then some people tried out something else. They say, okay, we need like a military reform to defend our country. And we can still uphold the Confucian values, but all we need is a military reform. And that fails spectacularly by the end of the 19th century. Then some people begin to point out, okay, in addition to a military reform, we also need a political reform. Then there's an experiment with constitutional monarchy and also the establishment of a Chinese republic, which failed as well.
Yeah.
Then people are just confused. They're saying, wait a minute, we tried out a restoration, we tried out the military reform, and we tried a political reform. These didn't work. There's something much deeper with the Chinese society. Then people point out they pointed the fingers toward the Chinese culture. They say, well, it's the Chinese culture is terrible. We need a cultural revolution to solve China's problems. And Mao Zedong grew up during the debate, intellectual debate, talking about, okay, there's something wrong with the Chinese culture. That's beginning of 1919. And then when the CCP actually established China, what Mao's trying to do is saying, okay, we're still troubled by this cultural problem. Then he kind of launched this cultural revolution during the last 10 years of his life.
And that was, and so what he was trying to do is bring that singular mindset to the population, yes? That we all have to believe in kind of, here it is, this is how China is going to be great again, and so he laid out the principles that he wanted everyone to follow, and then what were those principles? I mean, if you had to summarize, kind of what was he trying to accomplish?
Well, I would say for Mao himself, is absolutely trying to transform the Chinese society to get rid of the so-called Confucian cultures.
Yes.
One prominent example is actually, if you take a look at the Chinese language today, it's grammatically speaking, is similar with English. It's a very short language. But if you take a look, one example I always show to my students is actually when you take an airplane, there's a pamphlet in front of you, the multiple languages telling you essentially the same message, like in terms of emergency, what do you need to do. If you take a look at, you don't have to read the foreign languages, but just to read the word count. You see the Japanese, the Korean languages, and the Chinese languages, you will notice the Korean and the Japanese language are substantially longer.
Yes.
The Chinese are very short. One reason is because in traditional Chinese culture, in East Asian countries, you actually have three different forms of speech. Like if you're talking to your superior, talking to your boss, you're supposed to use one form of speech. You're talking to your colleagues, you're using one form of speech. You're talking with someone younger or inferior to your status, you're using another different speech. So this thing is completely disappeared from the Chinese language. So in Mao's perspective, basically saying, well, if something that is old, that he seems to be backward, China should get rid of. Then just take that out. Some other things that basically Mao's trying to tell the Chinese people is, yes, we're getting rid of the old is one thing, but how to move forward is another. And Mao was, let's say, is a believer, a believer of Marxism. He truly believed, let's say, a socialist society would be better than the capitalist society. So that's kind of the direction he's trying to let the Chinese people believe.
Yeah. With Mao's principles and the Cultural Revolution, what remains like in modern day China? Because China, I'm sure Mao, if he could come back and see China as it is today, what would he say?
Okay, this would be like some purely personal thoughts.
Oh, of course.
One thing I would say Mao would probably not like is the current the capitalist economy in China.
Yes.
Where people don't say it's a capitalist economy, but they say it's a socialism with the Chinese characteristics.
Right.
But
It's capitalist.
yeah, but down the end, it's capitalist economy. Mao probably don't like that.
Yeah.
And he really believes into this egalitarian society where where the government official are not supposed to use, let's say, material rewards to incentivize the workers to do all kinds of things. Where for Mao is basically he really don't. And another thing he probably doesn't like is. Some people's like a monopoly of the political powers.
Yeah.
People just refuse to step down, even though Mao himself kind of claimed the power until the last moment of his life. But Mao's been constantly engaging with this kind of party rectifications. So if somebody's being viewed as disqualified, they're gonna kick it out of the party pretty quickly. Right. But now in China, you pretty much have a lot of people's. Everybody knows this officials are corrupted, but because he has some better relationship with the higher ups, they're gonna preserve his position for lifelong.
Yeah, yeah. It's because how is it? Yeah, like does modern China still consider itself communist?
I would definitely say no.
Yeah.
Its economy has much more similarity with the United States.
Yeah.
Now, it's for example, when I grew up, there are all kinds of sidekick jobs for people to. Well, when I grew up, like actually not so much. In my school years, still is the most decent jobs you get is actually with the state.
Right.
You work for the government, or you work for some companies owned by the state. But I would say after 2000, things changed.
Yeah.
We have in China, there's a fastly developed capitalist economy. The private sector now is becoming more attractive to the young people. Like after people graduated, a very small number of people would consider to going to work for the government because they think it's low pay.
Right.
And it doesn't really bring that much of a material reward.
Well, they want to be the next Jack Ma or people like that. I'm sure that's probably like an inspirational character that they'd say, yes, that wealth and kind of a builder and the everything around it'd be very appealing, I'm sure, for many young people.
Yes. So China is definitely having a very vibrant capitalist economy nowadays. And on many, so it's when I actually arrived in this country, I'm actually a little bit nervous because all I've been told is like the United States is a pure capitalist economy.
Right.
And the interpersonal relationship is purely about money.
Yeah.
If you don't have money, people probably won't give you a very good facial expression.
There's some truth. There's a lot of truth to
okay.
to that.
But actually, it was like when I came here, I seldom experiences that.
Yes.
And I kind of get a strong feeling like back in China, I get more feelings of this like monetary relationships when you in a business negotiation when you say, oh, I can't accept this deal falls off. You see people instantly changing their face.
Right.
But here, yes, there's some truth to that, but I would say it's a similar thing.
Yeah.
I would say, yeah.
Well, we before we started, like the cameras rolling, we were talking about what people in America get right and what they get wrong about China. So, what is that? Because there's you've been in this country and you have people, and they obviously comment, with their impressions, and then you see, American newspapers, television, and how they cover it. Let's kind of start in the positive. What did they, as far as Americans, get right about China?
Well, I would think this would be like a very complicated question.
Of course.
I would say, based on my personal observation, personal experience, is the best way, okay, to actually know what China is all about is actually go there and check it out by yourself. That way, you can actually find out what China is all about, and you have your own interpretations. But I do have a personal story to share, which is about the Chinese people's perspective about Americans.
Oh, please, please.
This is actually very interesting. Like in 1997, Hollywood just made it into China. So before 1997, you don't have any American movies on show in Chinese theaters. 97, they entered China, but the time, since the number of the movie theaters actually very limited, and what they do is actually Hollywood is sell some of the copyright of American movies very cheaply to the TV stations, and some of the TV stations, they would just put the American movies on show, so the Chinese people would actually take a look at the movies and they get experience of what Americans are all like. 97, in my hometown in Henan province, there's actually a minor incident. I still remember in this day. During the summer, there's a Hollywood movie. I think the name is High Ice. It's actually a very, from today's perspective, I would think it's a pretty average movie.
Right.
The basic story plot is that during the spring break, a group of American college kids, they go out to climb up a very high, like a snow mountain. Then there's a blizzard come, people being trapped. And then there's a rescue worker being dispatched to rescue these college kids. At the end of the story is a happy ending.
Yeah.
I watched that movie when I was at home. I didn't really think much about it. But then over the weekend, the local TV station received a lot of angry protesting letters from the local people. So people are protesting. They're angry, saying, "Hey, look, in the past several decades, we've been told that the United States, the capitalist society, the relationship between humans are basically about money. But hey, according to the movie, it doesn't look like these rescue workers received extra bonus, and some of them even are willing to risk their life to rescue these American kids. What is going on here?" They're saying the local TV station are saying some good things about American imperialists, and then next week, the local TV station, the TV station chief kind of published an article in a local newspaper, offer in my personal opinion, a brilliant explanation. Right. Then they wrote an article saying, "Oh, we apologize for the confusions it caused by our movie, but here's some background the movie didn't really show." Is in the United States, going to college to receive education is actually a privilege. Is only those kids from the financial capitalist family background, they can go to the college. And by the way, there's actually a huge bounty to rescue these college kids. Therefore, the Americans are still the same Americans. They're greedy. They're greedy, capitalist.
Money, yes.
And then that way, the protests disappeared overnight, and people still believe, okay, this is what America is all about, and that's it. And when I came to this country, discovered, oh gosh, how come people just don't believe in this? This kind of explanation.
Yes, yeah, but so that was 97. Has that opinion changed, do you think, in modern day China as far as how they view Americans? Because obviously the dialogue between our countries is, at least with the political leaders, is pretty tense. But that's political leaders. The people in general, that they have many opinions. So do you think that opinion in China has changed, or are we still focused only on money and we're greedy and only care about that?
Well, I would say definitely it changed. It changed a lot.
Yes.
I would say after 2000, you have a lot more economic ties. Before President Trump kind of launched the trade war during his previous administration, I would say post 2000 up until the trade war, the relationships actually went pretty well. I'm like one of the beneficiaries of this education exchanges. Because at the time, my mom's actually really like she studied in England for a while for her PhD, and she actually wants me to apply for universities in England, but my dad kind of says, well, look, the United States, and in 2008 when the Olympic Games started, you have a lot of Americans show up, come to the countries. My dad is also saying, oh, well, you know what? The United States is, according to the newspaper and everything, is the best countries. Therefore, you should probably think about that. So my dad insisted to send me here. A lot of my friends are pretty much having the similar opinions, and many people actually admires, with more media exposures, people kind of admire this constitutional spirit, the check and balances systems. I would say it's a golden age in the early 2000s. For now, I would say a lot of Chinese people, they're being confused. Because in the past decades, because it's a deep economic ties, a lot of people, they actually benefited from this U.S.-China economic corporations. But ever since the trade war, many questions shows up, at least on the internet. People are saying, hey, wait a minute, are we being fooled for the past decade? Or what is going on out in there? Is this check and balance system, is this constitution spirit still work in the United States? And what's wrong? So I would say the more popular opinions over the internet is confusion. Like people are trying to find out, okay, what went wrong?
So now on the other side, what do as far as Americans, as far as how do they see China like correctly and incorrectly in your point of view? Because I mean, you've been around now, and you hear because positives that that China is kind of an economic miracle. That China's many people will say is much the people in general are harder working than many here in the United States. That China, not so positive is that China is that as far as that as a culture and as political leaders is kind of focused on kind of dominating the world someday. That now what you don't say is, well, who they're going to take that domination away from America, but that's not the point. But that that I think worries people, in terms of just that that they're just it's like America. You'll hear that term American exceptionalism, and so we always want to believe that we're the best, and I think it's always discomforting in America when China starts to do something better. What's the we have all the AI leaders that coming in, and then here's a new AI model from China that's cheaper, as effective, and then it just rattled everybody because you had all this capitalism built on all these billions of dollars people were going to make, and now on the other side of the world they show that you can they've created something with less computing power, far less money, and then you just keep rolling on. I mean, electric cars, it's like is it BYD?
Yeah, BYD, the company.
And they're just frightened to allow them into the United States because they would decimate the U.S. auto manufacturing. But I don't want to answer my own question.
Okay.
But kind of what do Americans, I guess, get right and wrong in terms of how they see China from your point of view?
I would definitely see there's a one like a popular misconception. Is like one thing I got constantly asking multiple times. Actually, the Chinese social credit system.
Yeah.
Is it a thing? Uh, I mean, yes, it's been proposed in China a couple of years ago,
Mm-hmm.
but it's never been implemented.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the way I see it is kind of like there are many politicians, like even in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you have congressmen making very hyperbolic claims,
Right.
and then the media take it over and saying, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna do this and this."
Right.
But in reality, I don't really see the implementation of this social credit and those stuff. So the point I'm trying to say is, politicians say a lot of things,
Sure.
and the media is only going to take over the most the dramatic claims,
Right.
so that to sell the stories. Um, I cannot say like the how many things are actually like is right or wrong in the
Mm-hmm.
eyes of Americans. Since I'm only being in this country for a decade or so,
Sure.
um, I would more like to say if you wanted to learn something,
Mm-hmm.
just avoid the big medias.
Yes.
Sometimes you give you skewed views. It's better, go out and check it out by yourself.
Yeah. Oh, all right. I'll float like some American perspectives. You tell me.
Okay.
Uh, that many see China as a surveillance state,
Mhm.
and so that in America, there's a high level of surveillance that we choose to ignore, but it's very different than the American ideal. So,
Mhm.
how correct or incorrect is that point of view?
Well, I would say the surveillance part is definitely true
Yeah.
because there's surveillance cameras nearly everywhere in the public space.
Right.
But there are pros and cons to it. Let's say the good side is definitely you don't really see a lot of crimes in China
Yeah.
because once a police officer shows up, pretty much you check the surveillance cameras, you will be able to actually find out the perpetrators
Right.
quite effectively. So of course, on the flip side is always people's privacies.
Right.
In China, the general consensus, since China have a 1.3 billion populations, many people would say, yeah, do you want a safer or do you want a more privacy?
Right.
And also another thing, which is kind of my personal opinion, I kind of think you earlier pointed out both, all governments, since Chinese government, American government, it looks like they all collect all kinds of data
Yes.
about their citizens, about the foreigners. I would say the common problem is actually the data protection laws.
Right.
I mean, if you check the data protection laws in this country, they're outdated,
Right.
and in China, similar things. One thing I'm thinking is actually the TikTok controversies.
Yes.
It's been shut down. I mean, is TikTok collecting this private data? Yes, of course. But there are other companies, Google, Facebook. They're collecting the same things.
You don't want to.
Yeah.
But that's good collection, not not the bad collection. That's
Therefore, like a good and bad, that's more like a moral judgment.
Yes.
I would say the solution to this is actually, come up with some more updated legislature, pass more laws that actually answers many of our contemporary questions.
Yeah.
That way, that doesn't really discriminate the Chinese companies from American companies. As long as you as long as the American government and the Chinese government lay down the ground rules,
Right.
so these companies, they know what they can do, what they cannot do. So that's what am I thinking.
American point of view, that overall the people in China are not kind of as happy as they are in the United States. Reason is that in the U.S. we have kind of our interpretation of freedom. You have that if you work hard, you can go anywhere. We have a government that may not be, enforce laws quite as strictly as they do in China, and so we, as a population are, and the Chinese people just work. We work hard, but they just work. It's like that's all that there is really work, and that's so it's kind of like we have it better. Americans just in general always believe that this is the best place in the world to live. And there's some positives, but we kind of ignore that. Okay, yeah, there's plenty of wonderful places elsewhere in the world, but how true is that in terms of like from the Chinese people? Are they happy? They got families, belief that there's future success ahead for them, their children, their grandchildren?
Well, to answer your question, I think, like based on what you just said a minute ago, if you change America with China,
yes,
that's my answer.
So you see that we both see each other the same way?
Yes. In China, people kind of interpret, okay, China is the best place to live.
Yes.
That's pretty much the story the public media is trying to sell,
right?
Especially given you have the very nationalist sentiment. I would say it's a common phenomenon. It's not only particular to China or to the U.S.
Right.
If you read some newspaper, let's say published in Japan or
right.
in Europe, I think more or less you will find similar stories. The local people tend to believe, okay, we're the best.
Yes.
There always is some kind of reasonings convince people to accept that kind of claims. Nevertheless, in China, I would say many Chinese people would say, oh, China is the most Asian civilizations, and the GDP is the number 2, the following after the United States. There are many reasons to believe that,
sure.
But such a claim, is it true? I'm not sure.
Right.
But the point I'm trying to say is, I think it's more like a nationalist sentiment rather than the realities.
Yeah. No, well said. Dramatic change of subject. That's history majors. You're a history major, and you kind of arrived at it after a brief time in accounting, and I did the same thing. I got out of undergrad and became an accountant for only one reason. My dad was an accountant, and I hated every minute, every hour, every day. But it kind of led me in business to kind of find marketing. So that became kind of my pathway, and it's nice. I learned all how to budget, and I'm comfortable with numbers, but just I don't want to be in accounting every day. And apologies to Shenzi Wang, who if she's listening to this. We don't hate accounting. We love you. Just don't want to do accounting. But history majors, kind of what Lyon students interested in majoring in history, kind of what advice would you give them as far as kind of like areas that to focus on, areas to research, or different careers? Like obviously you have a career as a professor, but what advice you like next year you'll become an advisor to students. So for a history major, what advice would you give them?
This is actually the same question I've been asking myself since day one. I switched to history major. Right now, I would actually say, based on my personal experiences, also my observation on my peers, I would say there are actually many different job prospects. Well, of course, number one would be like education.
Yes.
Since there are many academic institutes in the U.S., a different level of schools that definitely requires like some people teach history. Therefore, if students are interested in teaching, let's say high school or higher, like a lower level, they can go ahead and obtain some degrees or certificate in that. and even go to obtain an MA would suffice for the purpose of teaching in the high school level. But if you're interested in doing some teaching or researching higher above, I'll definitely go ahead to obtain a PhD with that. And this step away from education in the U.S., they're actually a big field outside, the international education field out in there. There are many, even though now the U.S.-China relations somewhat went down, but still there are many joint ventures, education groups. They have a huge demand for teachers, like English teachers or teachers who can teach American history in English in China. Those are definitely another potential jobs for them if they're willing to step outside the comfort zone, so do a little bit of experiment. So that's about educations. But other than the history majors, a lot of people, they majored in history with the intentions of going to law school in the grad school, because not every academic institute, they have a pre-law major. So history, I would say, is one of the few disciplines nowadays still focused on training people's writing skills. Particularly given now we have so many AI technologies.
That'll be another
podcast. But I would say the writing ability to the critical writing and also reading is a key skill that will serve a student's future career, no matter what jobs they choose. Therefore, with the good writing skills, I would say to prepare student well for to step into the law schools. And other than that, since I spent a couple of years in Virginia and also living in Northern Virginia, close to the D.C. regions, although I said something about in China, the Chinese young people don't like to work for the government. But here actually in D.C., it's very common for students graduated from, with a history major to enter some government agencies, the field experts like State Department, FBI, and all these government agencies. They would have a huge demand for the field expert who know the history of different parts of the world. That would be another thing to consider. And another thing I'm thinking people can actually step into consulting. If some students, like if a major in history, you don't really want to work with the government, there's always the consulting firms out in there, the consulting institute that requires the people who have this background trainings over, let's say, the East Asians or Middle East or Africa or Europe. This is definitely another place worth of trying to go there and to apply for a job. So that's mostly what I get for now. Well, of course, there's always the trajectory. Like if you enjoy teaching at the college level, go ahead, apply for a PhD, and then
come join us at Lyon, man.
So that's kind of my answers for the job prospect.
Excellent. Woo. Thank you for a great conversation.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me here.
All right.
Always a pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners, our viewers of the Career Pathways podcast. We come to you each week with great faculty like Wu here. And before I sign off, before I leave, you, Cheyenne, I'm looking at you. Always the question, and I know you have the answer. The question is, where can someone find the Career Pathways podcast?
You can find the Career Pathways podcast on 99.97% of all platforms. The same amount of germs that get killed with Germ-X, supposedly.
There, she just gave you a scientific hot take. Yes, so thank you, Cheyenne. Thank you, Sir Johnny. She's over there in the back auditing the class, so she's actually seeing podcasts being made. We'll get her in this chair eventually, and we can interview her as well. And thank you to our viewers. If you like the show, please subscribe. If you like it and want to tell the world about it, please give us a review. How many stars, Cheyenne, should the review be?
5 out of 5.
You got it, and she is the expert. So once again, thank you for being a viewer, listener of the Career Pathways podcast. We will come back to you next week. Take care.
This broadcast is sponsored in part by Lyon College and by KILT Studios.